You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
The Preschool Gate by JASPER DEWITT. Performed by Otis Jiry. Part 1. Taking the Run. The ritual had begun. Shivering partly with terror and partly with cold, the victims stood, knowing their ordeal was inevitable. Tears leaked down their face, and their hands balled into fists in a futile gesture to prevent sobbing. Unmoved by this display of misery, the other participants stood in a semicircle, and their leader intoned the words that would begin the awful ceremony. "Cry, baby! Chicken! Bark, 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 bark!" Okay. Maybe phrasing that like you were about to read an account of an actual human sacrifice was a bit melodramatic. But to the victim of the ritual involved, namely, 8-year-old me, it may as well have been. The year was 1991, and like so many bullying victims in the small suburban town I came from, I'd been given a task that was supposed to doom those who attempted it to an entire secondary school career of obloquy. I was being made to walk past the dreaded preschool gate. Now, you're probably wondering how a gate to a preschool could be dreaded by anyone, even kids. Well, it wasn't a gate that led to an actual preschool. That wouldn't be scary at all, unless the preschool itself was some sort of abandoned place that was supposed to be haunted. It wasn't. And even then, just walking past the gate alone wouldn't be the scariest thing about the experience. No, the truth is, the gate had nothing to do with the preschool. It just happened to stand next to the preschool playground. But the near preschool gate doesn't sound nearly as good or as creepy as the preschool gate, which is why everyone just called it that. Why was it dreaded? If you ask most people who grew up in the area, they say it was because every kid who'd gone to the preschool, which was most kids, had been shooed away from exploring behind it by the preschool staff at least once, and had taken this to mean more than it did. And there's something to recommend that theory. I'm sure even the preschool staff would say they only wanted to avoid small children running off if you asked why they stopped the local preschoolers from going behind it. However, that theory would have done nothing to comfort 8-year-old me. Nor, I believe, would it comfort you if you actually saw the gate in person, as I did that day. The object itself was a long, ugly rectangle of wrought iron bars whose openings looked like a set of flat, glowering teeth framed in the malignant dullness of rusted pitch-black metal. Its designers clearly intended it to stop cars from barreling through it, out of concern for the preschool children who might be running beyond it, but had been less attentive to the ability of those same children to climb over the thing. In the spring and summer, it looked eerily out of place, a black, sneering mess of girders surrounded by cherry blossoms or by green. It was still menacing then, but more in the quiet way that taints an otherwise pretty picture. But my ordeal didn't take place in spring or summer. It took place in winter, when the mass of tangled, graying, barren trees around the gate amplified its menace tenfold and seemed to speak even more clearly of things unknown lurking in the midst of unplumbed quiet. It was the kind of freezing, East Coast, late January day when you feel like every foggy breath you admit is the very breath of life, and that every inhalation of frigid oxygen is turning your blood to glistening red ice, and you with it. The kind of day when scarves and hoods and gloves and boots all seemed like quaint and futile attempts to armor oneself against the battering of an unspeakably cruel, sadistic, shrieking ghost that called itself the wind. But at that moment, the only unspeakably cruel and sadistic force I cared about was the tall and seemingly endless, imposing fifth-grade form of Bert Hudley. Clad in galoshes fit for invading Russia, Kevlar-thick blue jeans, and a royal purple parka that made his form more hulking and savage with every fold, Hudley was staring down at my blubbering, shaking form with a smirk made somehow all the more impressive because his hood was tied so tight that I could only feel it. His hands, calloused, strong, and pudgy with blood flow, hung defiantly bare in the cold. "Come on, baby Barry," Bert said in the closest thing to a rasping voice a 10-year-old can muster. "Even go back there and take the run, or say the magic words, and this'll be over in a few minutes." This didn't help my hesitation, because neither option was something I wanted to hear. Taking the run meant pretty much what you'd expect, walking past the gate and running down the small service road behind it to a parking lot slightly more than a mile away. Of course, I could have theoretically walked. Plenty of adults who worked at the preschool itself probably did do just that, without the knowledge of their charges. But for them, the gate meant nothing. To me, and those like me, that ugly, black, rusted thing may as well have been the portcullis to Dracula's castle or worse. No, it was worse, because at least if you walked into Dracula's castle, you knew to expect a meeting with a vampire. But no one could agree on what lurked beyond the gate. Rumors ranged from a crazy pack of wild dogs to witches to vampires, and even to monsters wholly original to the mind of the rumor-monger. And that's why anyone who did go beyond the gate referred to it as taking the run, because faced with threats like that, what could you do but run? On the other hand, those who weren't brave enough to do that could say the magic words. But those words, while simple, were terribly cruel by design. You had to tell Bert to his face, "Spank me like a big wuss, baby." And from that point on, for however long he and his thugs tormented you, you knew you couldn't complain to anyone because you invited it. You'd asked him to do it. It was your fault. In other words, however you sliced it, my options weren't great. I could have tried to run away from the scene entirely, of course, but believe me when I say that Bert and his thugs were too careful to allow that to happen. That's why they always picked younger, softer kids whose legs were too short to outmatch theirs, or who were too fat to keep it up for long enough. And almost without exception, those kids had said the magic words when faced with the dreadful, sadistic choice presented. Because at least you knew what Bert would do to you. Who knew if you'd even survive going beyond the gate? But of course, you probably know what I did. After all, this story wouldn't be anything more than an incident of childhood bullying, and certainly nothing to write about in this context, if I'd followed in their footsteps. So now that I've explained what was at stake and why it was so unpleasant, let me take you into the scene fully and stop beating around the bush. "Look at his face!" hooted one of Bert's friends, pointing at me. "It looks like his eyes will freeze. You gonna cry, baby Barry? You gonna cry?" "Shut up, Randall," I shot back in a faux defiant, pitchy whine. "Oh, you gonna make me, Barry, baby? You gonna make me?" Both of you shut up, Bert growled. The baby has to make his choice. You'll get to make him pay for that after he does, Randall. The other boy, a dark-haired string bean with sunken eyes and a body too tall for his age, glowered but shoved his hands back into his pocket when Bert's eyes turned to him. You're right, he sneered. Baby Barry won't take the run. He'll say the magic words just like all the other babies. Yeah? And what if I don't? I said more shrilly than I meant to. Honestly, I was just bluffing, trying to buy time, hoping that maybe an adult might catch sight of us. Are you gonna? Bert asked, his face betraying a hint of surprise at my having the guts to ask the question. You're gonna take the run, Baby Barry? Gonna be a dead man instead of a baby? Maybe I will, I said. And even though I knew in my heart it was an idle threat, an idea jumped to my mind in that moment. I gave them what I hoped was a confident grin. I'll take the run, if Randall does. That's not the deal. Why not? I asked. Are you a baby too, Randall? Nuh-uh. But you have to make the run alone, baby. That's the deal. Tell him, Bert. That's the deal. But Bert didn't say anything. Randall coughed nervously. Come on, Bert. Tell him. That's the deal. Bert turned to him, and I saw Randall quail under the bigger boy's gaze. Did this mean? Deal's what I say it is, Randall, Bert grunted. Right now you sound like more of a baby than Baby Barry. Are you a baby, Randall? No, said Randall. But it won't be as scary for him if he doesn't do it alone. Yeah, it will, said Bert. You said you want to beat him up? He wants to go back there with you chasing him. That's scary. He's bluffing, Randall sputtered. He ain't gonna go back there, Bert. You know he ain't. Yes, I will, I said. The voice in my head started screaming at me to shut up, but I ignored it. I swear I will. You go back there after me and I'll take the run. Just give me a head start. Bert turned back to me. I still couldn't see his face, but when he spoke, he sounded impressed. Okay, Baby Barry, he said. You go back there. We'll give you a 10-second head start. What if something else starts chasing him? Randall squeaked. And what if it starts chasing me, too? You're saying you aren't as fast as a baby, Randall? No, but then you'll get away from it if it does. And if I don't? Bert shrugged. I don't want slow babies hanging around me anyway. Randall slumped in defeat. I could feel him giving me a look that would have curdled milk. But in that instance, I was more focused on Bert. When Randall spoke, it was with a distinctly unbullyish quaver in his voice. Okay, Bert, fine. But if I catch him, I get to beat him up. If you want to beat him up while you're still behind the preschool gate, go for it. That'd be badass, Bert said curtly. He turned back to me. Okay, Baby Barry, he's coming after you. You better get back there. I'll give you 3 seconds to climb the gate. 3. Shit. I mentally berated myself. How had I not seen this coming? Did I just agree to take the run? What if I got caught by Randall? What if something else caught me? What if... 2. Oh, God, I'm going to die. 1. I realized I didn't have time to think like this. At that moment, it was do or die. I clambered frantically over the gate, part of my mind still flailing in terror at what I was supposed to do, and just as Bert said 0, I started sprinting like I'd never sprinted before. I vaguely registered Bert beginning to count my 10-second head start, and that made me run faster. Before he got even halfway, I was too far to hear him. But with that noise out of my head, the adrenaline powering my unstoppable sprint beyond the gate began to fade, and suddenly the realization of my surroundings closed around my heart and squeezed. I was doing the unthinkable. I was taking the run. I had gone beyond the gate and was now at the mercy of whatever else was around me. I suppose the other boys might have let that fear make them run faster, but for me, the terror felt like some half-imagined fiend clawing at me and slowing me down, making me want to freeze in place instead. My breath got ragged, and my eyes began to water, half with fear and half with the effort of moving. Eventually, I slowed to the fastest walk I could imagine, just to catch my breath, and with every step, I began to turn my head around with anxiety, trying to catch a glimpse of anything that might be coming for me, or to hear the slightest sign of it. But nothing moved. Nothing stirred. Stillness was everywhere, except for the raw sound of my own frantic breaths. It was as if the entire world held its breath beyond the gate, and my own inhalations were a sonar beacon, signaling to everything unseen that I did not belong there and would be easy prey. I tried to breathe more quietly, but this only had the effect of slowing me down more and making the silence of the forest tighten its grip on my mind. Then, abruptly, there was a sound that cut the chill air like a buzzsaw, the high-pitched scream of someone in pain just off the track. Panicked, I started to run again, sure it must be whatever monster lurked beyond the gate. But then the scream formed words. "No, please, somebody, help!" It wasn't a monster, it was a person. And apparently a person in desperate need. To my shame, I'll admit that my first thought was one of relief. Perhaps the monster had found someone else, and would be too distracted to come after me, and I could make it out of this alive. But then the weight of this sank in. Could I really leave someone to die here, beyond the gate, to save my own skin? Every inch of my body pleaded with me to run as fast as I could, but my conscience held me in place. I was about to try walking again when I heard the screaming once more. "Oh, please, anybody, help!" My conscience went out, and with a terrified inhalation, I started creeping toward the side of the road where the noise had come from. I'd just look, I told myself. If it was someone being attacked by a monster, I'd go get help once I got away myself. If it wasn't and I could help, I would. Battling adrenaline and terror, I peeked down the hill through the trees and got the most horrible shock of my young life. Beneath me, a small river lay frozen in the bleak winter frost, and just on the other side of that river, his face turned toward me, and it was a naked boy about 7 years my senior, with blood running down his face and pooling on the ice. But what made the scene so horrible wasn't the boy himself. It was the creature holding onto his wrists, licking and biting his neck. It looked like a man, a hairless, emaciated man. This wasn't like any person I'd seen. No human could or should look like this. The thing's body was covered in weeping sores that looked almost black in the harsh light. The sores were irregular in shape, some no bigger than a pimple, while others stretched over large patches of skin, rendering it waxy and moist like a gutted candle. The creature was snarling with rough, sadistic glee as it crouched over its prey in a way that seemed too uncanny and brutal for my young, innocent mind to comprehend. At the time, I could only stare in frozen, bleak trauma. All I could hope for was that it wouldn't see me. "Run, baby Barry, run!" The sound of Randall's voice blasted into my ears, and in horror, I froze. Maybe I only heard it. Maybe the monster was too far down the hill. It wasn't. The thing raised its head at the sound of Randall's voice and cocked its head, listening. I listened too, hearing Randall's footsteps get closer and closer. He was slowing, seeming to realize I wasn't moving and would be apparently easy quarry. I debated running, but if I did, he'd probably make more noise, and then the thing would certainly see me. So, against my every instinct, I stayed stock still, waiting and hoping that once he caught up with me, he'd see what I was seeing and go quiet. "What's the matter? You too tired?" Randall snarled. "You tired from all that running, baby? Poor baby, what you looking—" He had gotten just up behind me. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel the air go out of his lungs the instant he looked down. "Back away slowly," I hissed at him under my breath. But he either didn't hear me or didn't care, because the next thing I knew, the thing instantly stared toward the sound of Randall's scream, straight at me and him. "Run!" I didn't bother turning to him then. I just shouted it and took off. For once in his life, Randall listened. He tore away from the scene with me, all taunts and schoolyard rivalries forgotten in that sheer moment of existential terror. A few minutes passed as we ran together, panting against the chill wind and the chill in our hearts, adrenaline flooding our limbs and giving us the jackrabbit sprint that only comes in times of true peril. Then we heard a sound so simple and so terrible that I'm surprised it didn't drive us both mad with fright. The sound of leaves and twigs crackling under alien feet just near the side of the road. I caught a large, flesh-colored shape out of the corner of my eyes nearby and realized the thing was chasing us. No, it wasn't chasing us. It had caught up to us and was keeping pace. I saw it prime its legs to spring at us, but then suddenly, without warning, it stopped and gave a too-human growl of frustration and ducked back into the woods, as if for some reason that I could not yet understand. It seemed unwilling to run out into the road. Saying this, I sprinted further toward the center of the path, and as I did so, I saw a sight too grateful to properly describe. The sight of another wrought-iron black gate, leading into a parking lot where Bert and his remaining lackeys stood waiting for us. Randall, seeing this too, shrieked with mad glee and began running faster, but his uncontrolled speed nearly ruined him as he careened around the final corner, his feet taking him wide of the corner itself and close to the edge of the forest. A pair of gnarled, deformed hands reached out from the trees to grab him, and with a final yell, I sprinted even faster and yanked Randall toward the center of the road, just barely free of the grasping fingers. There was a scream of rage and frustration from the trees as Randall and I pelted toward the exit gate and away from that awful haunted place. We scrambled over that final obstacle together, panting and frantically dizzy from our mad dash to survive. Bert and his friends watched us, first with amusement, then with open curiosity as we caught our breath, leaning on each other as we did, all hostilities completely forgiven in that moment. Finally, Bert cleared his throat, and Randall and I looked up. "So you two made it, huh? What's the matter? Too scary?" Randall stared up at his friend, and I saw his mouth move. He was trying to speak, trying to issue angry denials, trying to form words at all, but the trauma of the experience had stolen them. I cleared my throat and spoke for him. "Nearly got us killed, Bert." Bert sneered. "Oh, yeah? By what? Monsters? Woo!" "Don't!" The shell-shocked finality in Randall's voice stopped Bert instantly. When he spoke next, it was with a slight hesitation. "Come on, Randall. I'm only making fun of Baby." "Don't," Randall said again. "He's not a baby. You saved my life." Bert laughed nervously. "Come on, Randall. Stop kidding." Then, after a few moments, "You are kidding, right?" Randall shook his head frantically. "No, Bert. No, Bert. No, Bert. No, Bert. No." He started shaking, and I can tell it was nothing to do with the cold. I looked up at Bert and his goons to see the reaction. Bert's expression was itself unreadable under the parka, but the other boys were staring at Randall, clearly unnerved. One of them cleared his throat. "So, what did he save your life from, Randall?" Again Randall tried to speak, but nothing came out, and he only shook his head. I spoke up for him. "You don't want to know," I said. "But if you guys make anyone else go back there, they could die. So you better stop." "Oh, yeah?" said Bert from under his hood. "You gonna make us, baby bear?" Randall had stood up and punched Bert in the jaw before he could finish his sentence. Bert fell back and hit the pavement hard, his hood flying up and disclosing his piggish pale face under its mop of reddish-blonde hair. He stared up at Randall in dumb shock. "You hit me," he said, clearly nonplussed. "I told you not to call him a baby," Randall said. "Now you listen. We can't send no one back there no more. Something could get them." "But what?" "Shut up. It's like Barry told you. You don't want to know." Bert stared from Randall to me, and for an instant I saw fear in his eyes. Then, mullishly, he stood up and pushed Randall to the ground and smacked him across the face. "You don't hit me," he snarled at Randall. "Not now. Not ever again." "And you don't send anyone back there," I said, now too familiar with real fear to let Bert scare me. "Not now, not ever again." Bert, to my surprise, almost flinched at the authority in my voice. Then he began to advance on me, a hard look on his face. I stood my ground and stared back up at him, not even blinking at his ham-fisted attempt at menace. We stood there, glaring at each other for a few seconds, before he stepped away and laughed mockingly. "Fine, Barry," he said. "I guess you're not a baby after all." "You're right," I said. "I'm not." Bert sighed and spread his hands in a gesture of faux magnanimity. "This was getting boring anyways," he said, giving a practiced yawn. "We'll think of something else to scare the babies." I wasn't satisfied. I held out my hand. "Swear?" I said. "Shake on it." Bert looked down at my hand and back up at me, a grudging respect in his eyes. He took my hand. I wish that was where the story ended. It would make everything so much easier for this to be nothing more than a boy's tale of coming of age, with the unexplained and uncanny nothing more than background noise. But unfortunately, all this is just prologue for the real story. And like most things in real life, that story isn't wrapped up with a lesson ready for Aesop. That story is messy and ugly and senseless, and I wish I could forget it. But I owe it to someone to tell it. And where this story began, with the preschool gate and my being forced to pass by it, that one ends with the preschool gate, and with me actively inviting its terrible secrets.